It's my great pleasure to introduce Karen Jaw-Madson today for VC++ 2020. Karen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am the author of Culture Your Culture, Innovating Experiences at Work, which is right behind me here. I own my own consulting firm. It's called Co.Design of Work Experience. I'm also the founder of A New HR, which is an online platform for the future of work thought leadership. And then I am also an instructor at Stanford University Continuing Studies program. That's me in a nutshell.
Great. And we're here to talk about the importance of culture and its relationship to diversity and inclusion. So can you start with that?
Yeah, I love that you even put it together in the first place, because there's been so much wonderful energy around fostering diversity and looking at their company's efforts around it. And this is all in light of a lot of the social unrest that's going on. That's the difficult part, obviously. But what it's done is created this new energy or new initiative around taking a look at diversity and what's going on within the organization. My frustration is that that's not always tied to culture. They see it as standalone work, when you and I both agree that it is intricately linked together, and it's not something you can really separate. So from my perspective, I think it can be very superficial to look at diversity from a recruiting standpoint only. It's very important, but that's not all of it. From a cultural standpoint, you need to set the conditions where diversity thrives, right? Otherwise, you're going to be recruiting until the cows come home, and it'll never be done. You'll never be able to retain or leverage diversity. You might get your numbers, but you're not going to get the genuine benefit of having a diverse workforce work for you. So that, to me, is the first and foremost important point, is how important diversity and culture need to be linked together.
And one of the things we've talked about is the importance of embedding or designing culture from day one. Can you speak to that in more detail?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's actually one of the reasons why I wrote my book in the first place. I was frustrated with the fact that culture is oftentimes blamed for a lot of the problems that businesses come across. And then you hear a little bit about great cultures, but it was mostly around, well, we had this problem, this big blow up, it's because of the cultural conditions behind it. Everyone was blaming the culture, which was probably true, but no one really understands culture to the degree that they can intentionally design, implement, manage, sustain great culture for their businesses. And so I went about writing my book for that very purpose, is because there are all these books around, what are great archetypes of wonderful cultures, which is very informative. And there's also a lot of how we did it books, right? Basically, one large case study.
Right.
And there was nothing around this building the capability piece. And so that's why I felt very strongly that this book needed to be written to be able to build that ability, to be able to leverage culture for the better. And so Culture Your Culture is about teaching people how to use design of work experience, the framework, on being able to do the step-by-step how-to for culture. It really breaks it down to digestible pieces to help people build upon that work and tie it all together. I think the connective pieces was what was missing.
So if I'm a founder and I'm launching a company from a napkin, what are the things that I should be thinking about at day zero for creating a culture of inclusion?
Yeah, so when I work with startups, it's in two different buckets, especially early on. First of all, it should be thought about upfront, right? Oftentimes I've spoken with people in the ecosystem that feel that culture doesn't come in until later. And it can, and it should if it hasn't so far, but starting with culture in mind from the very beginning is going to make a huge difference. And that happens in two different ways. First of all, it begins with the founding team. And so I work with organizations, new businesses starting out, on establishing a founding team culture that's going to make sure that they focus on what's important to get off the ground, as opposed to devolving into infighting. And I've unfortunately seen startups fail as a result of founders not getting along. It's already hard enough to get a business off the ground. It shouldn't be that the culture on the team is the reason why. And in fact, it could be the reason why it succeeds. And so I work with new startups to be able to establish that up front to make sure the founding team dynamics are healthy. The other side of it is, as they hire their first employees, is to establish corporate identity. And what do I mean by corporate identity? It's the purpose, mission, vision, and values that become the foundational building blocks for their culture as they grow. And you and I both know when startups do scale, they scale very quickly. And it's very easy to lose touch with the people, especially as you grow very large very quickly. And so those building blocks are that much more important to make sure that they're building culture from those, and then being able to design an employee experience that aligns with it. So I'm a big fan of maturity models, because that's a great way of keeping track of your scaling, even if it's happening super fast. A little bit of strategic thought upfront goes a long way. So those are two examples of ways in which I work with early stage companies to be able to leverage culture from the very beginning.
So I think the stat is something like well over 80% of founding teams are all male. What kinds of things can a founding team, because that's the expected result at where we are today, what can they do to fight the fundamental structural challenges of being an all-male founding team as they build their company, first phase, first 10 in, all that?
Yeah. So I'm, no fault to them, but a lot of startups, begin with tapping their friends and family, right? They do that for their seed funding too, right? And so what they do is tend to reach out to friends and family to help find their co-founders. Well, if you're only talking to the people that are immediately around you, you're going to get the same type of people over and over again. And so there's this I think there's this myopic view of just getting the task done instead of saying we need to do this right sometimes. And so it's really important to partner with people like you and I, who are out there talking and meeting lots of people of all different backgrounds, tapping communities and being able to work. And I believe there's also some work being done around helping co-founder matching. And taking advantage of those, or even if it's not there in their local area, if they want to stay local, then they got to create it. But this, I think this focus on just getting the business off the ground, but not necessarily getting it done right, this moving fast and breaking things, can only go so far. There's got to be some strategic thinking. And you and I know, having sat through a ton of pitches, is that a lot of the questions investors give to these founders is understanding what the big picture is, what's the long-term strategy, right? And so they've got to be able to think beyond either getting that first MVP, right? And thinking beyond just getting the work done, because they're going to have to go back and try to fix challenges later on because they didn't think about it up front. There's a lot we've already learned about what it takes to create great companies, and we just have to educate ourselves, pair up with the right people, and be able to be more intentional about how we establish our businesses.
That's great. So just to recap that, one of the themes is, as a founder, and I think as any actor in the system, challenge yourself to go outside your personal network, because your personal network reflects certain choices you've made and is fundamentally narrower than the universe out there. And then if you want to be a global success, you need to be able to have global context.
Exactly. I mean, you need that on the team. That's been proven time and time again, especially when you're trying to innovate something. You need diverse thought. You need diverse thinking. You need diverse perspectives and experiences to make that a great product, to make it a great company.
So let's talk a little bit about purpose, mission, vision, values. I can say that I've been in many companies that had mission statements that were completely devoid of meaning. You know, we optimize value for shareholders that could have been applied generically to, you know, the local newsstand and Apple, and it wouldn't have made any difference. So how can I, as a founder, as someone trying to create a culture that's meaningful, get past the corporate gobbledygook and say something that matters?
Well, another thing I've been seeing is that a lot of the times these are being developed by ad agencies or communication firms on their behalf. They're not actually doing the work, exploring why they exist and what they exist for and how they're going to achieve it. If an organization is taking the time to think that through, they're taking an opportunity. Right now, it's a missed opportunity when they create this generic language that means nothing, or even worse, is antithetical to how they operate.
Sure.
Right? That's a problem. But this unique combination of purpose, mission, vision, and values, that's specific to a company, and it's got to show in how people experience life within it, right? And so if you don't have that, you're not differentiating yourselves. That's the problem with these generic statements. Everyone sounds like everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Why would anyone want to come work with you? Why would anyone want to partner with you if you sound like everybody else? And what makes you special? What makes you unique? What makes you worth partnering with? What makes you what makes you worth going to work with, you know? And so I think that is a missed opportunity these days. I think it's a problem with culture is that because people don't understand it, they don't pay attention to it or they dismiss it. And so again, that's why for me, it's about educating people about the importance of it, because we know how much it influences absolutely every aspect of a business. I mean, look, you go into any function, you go into any tools or systems or products, and there's culture behind it. And people don't always understand or recognize it until it sadly slaps them in the face. You know?
So let's talk about culture as it relates to inclusion, and to just expand on that a little bit. I think that organizations, in my experience, that are new to the problem, or new to tackling the problem, let me say it that way, start with we need to be more diverse in our hiring pipeline, and we need to look more places to find candidates. But I think that the organizations that are successful go beyond that and say we not only have to find people and make them meaningful offers, but we have to make sure that they feel welcome once they're here. And that's the inclusion part. And I think that ties incredibly strongly to culture. So what kinds of things have you seen that are successful in making inclusion work?
Yeah. Well, design of work experience, my framework, actually helps a lot to set the condition where diversity thrives, right? And it starts, the first phase of that framework is to start from your current state, understanding why are things the way they are. A lot of organizations don't have that self-awareness to be able to understand why aren't we diverse in the first place?
Sure.
What are the aspects or the complexities behind the social relationships here that make it so that we don't have diversity? So that's the first step, is understanding the starting point, because how do you know where you're going to go and how you're going to get there, right?
Drill into that a little bit and talk about metrics, audits, OKRs. If I'm an early stage startup and don't have capability model, mature infrastructure, what should I be measuring right out of the gate?
So do you know how people go out and test their product in the market, right? They go out and they talk to their target audience or their consumers or their customers. It's the same thing. You're just turning that lens inward. You got to do that research with your employees and to be able to understand what are the patterns of behavior that are affecting people's mindsets and are changing perceptions and creating certain outcomes that aren't, you know, if you if you want things to be different, you have to do things differently. And so you have to understand, what are you doing, right? So I would say, go turn that lens internal, do some research, talk with your employees. That's a novel idea, right? And when I say research, I'm serious about, like, taking 3 to 5 different methodologies where you can get self-reported data, observational information, build insights from that, understand their criteria. This is all aspects of design thinking that many of us know how to do. Except that we're just not doing it,
So I think this is a great point, and just to expand on it a little bit, any founder should be able to articulate the unique value proposition of the company. And if they apply those same principles, those same design principles to culture and to hiring and to inclusion, it's just that a lot of these techniques are abandoned when people turn to culture and just feel like it should organically happen by magic, and not to actually apply executive intelligence to it.
Well, and here's my thing. I mean, culture is either an asset or a liability, right? It's either an asset or a liability. That means that if you're not leveraging and managing culture as a strength in the organization, it has the potential to hurt your business. And so being able to be intentional about it is so important, and self-aware. Because if you want, it's not just diversity for diversity's sake. You want, diversity 2.0, right? And that includes not only belonging, but access, right? Equality, fairness, right? Because that's where you start to get the benefits of it, and be able to tie that directly to your business outcomes. So I feel really strongly that there's some education that needs to happen in this space. But one of my favorite quotes is, our worlds are formed by the questions we ask. So if I can get people here to start thinking about it and asking questions around it, change can already begin. So I appreciate you wanting to talk about this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's look at this from a different vantage point. If I'm an investor and I'm looking at companies to add to my portfolio, how should I think about assessing their culture? How can I use my power as an investor to filter for companies that I think are going to be more successful based on cultural strength?
So you either build that capability within your own firm first, or you work with somebody external like myself to bring that capability from the outside and help you build it. So a lot of the conversations I have with investors is, would you like some help in ensuring that your portfolio remains organizationally healthy? People aren't necessarily looking at it that way. Or when it comes to M&A, we know that a lot of times culture clashes lead to the failures of partnerships or mergers, right?
Yeah.
And they're not looking at culture as part of due diligence when they should be. And it's always remedial after the fact, when people who have options leave very quickly, and you're trying to fix something. And by the way, it's impacted your business now, right? Your investment in that deal is now starting to go out the door.
So really investors, just to push on that a little, the VC community's terribly undiverse, right, compared to the population at large. And how much do you feel like the firms that are able to make change in their portfolio have really cleaned up their own act first? And how do you have success stories of organizations that have sort of looked themselves in the mirror and said, we can do better, and then driven change? And if so, how did they do it?
Right. So I'm looking at this from an investor point of view. It's so important to be able to, I would think that most investor firms have a certain strategy behind what they want to invest in, right?
Sure.
And so there is some distance to go, obviously, but we do have some firms that are trying to do it differently, right? So they're trying to invest in the future of work, as an example, or they want to invest for social impact, right? So I think those more mission-driven investors are down that path of trying to figure that out for themselves. I think the ones that have done it always the same way, that only take them so far. There's so much research around lost potential. So even if business is going really well, and it isn't for a lot of people right now, but say that it is, even if you're succeeding in spite of yourselves in some way, how much potential are you leaving on the table here? And that's been quantified already through studies, right? Upwards of, I think, 30+%.
Yeah, those are McKinsey numbers.
It's not, yeah, it's not little, right?
Yeah.
So if you're
I kind of look at it,
well, you can do even better.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is too much on a soapbox, but I look at it as like global warming in the 90s. It's like the science is there, but there are plenty of people that just kind of shrug their shoulders and it's like, it's not my problem. And I think that on group decision making, if you look at peer-reviewed stuff at any level, from team to board, you get better outcomes with a diverse group, all other things being equal.
Yeah, I think for people, these relationships or the social or the people aspect of the business is, to use one investor's words to me, esoteric.
Yeah.
But you talk to anybody who works for anybody else, and they can tell you culture is quite tangible.
Mm-hmm.
It's real. It impacts people's well-being. It affects their careers. It makes or breaks them. And so I think this whole thing about understanding the importance of, even if you can't touch and feel it, you know it's there, and we know enough about it so that we can do something about it. So that at the end of the day, it's a choice. Like I said earlier, it's either an asset or a liability. You're going to do something about culture and diversity, or you're not. And then you got to live with the outcome of that. Now, the good news is that it's not too late to make a change anytime. So whether you start with, all this thinking in the beginning of your organization, or if it comes down later down the pike, there's a lot of on-ramps and off-ramps to this work that can begin anytime. And so I want people to understand that they can do something tomorrow.
You always can start with where you are and move the rock. Let me ask a couple of other questions. One is, what kinds of things does an organization need to do as they're scaling to maintain, promote, and develop culture? Because many venture-backed companies go through explosive growth, and if you're doubling in size every 6 months or every year, it's really challenging to maintain institutional memory.
Absolutely. So that's where that corporate identity stuff comes in, because that's got to be consistent throughout everything that's done. Mm-hmm. And that the maturity models that I mentioned earlier. So if they even took a week, and that's a generous, if they took some time mm-hmm. to just lay out how they're going to scale quickly and what it means and what are the milestones at each and what the culture looks like or how it's going to be implemented, or design their employee experience up front and maintain self-awareness, build the capability to manage change. By the way, that's one of the projects I'm working on right now with a client, is they don't have that capability to fully leverage change, and scale up is nothing but a lot of change, right?
Right.
And so that's another capability to build. All that talent that goes into building the products and the business can also be directed toward this kind of work and be able to be complementary to one another.
Then the last question, we're now in a world of remote work for many of us, mm-hmm. and developing, maintaining, promoting culture across Zoom instead of in person or at the water cooler presents new challenges. What kinds of things have you seen that work well or don't work in this new Zoom world we're in?
Well, I think one of the things we found is that companies with decent cultures became even more decent remotely, right? And vice versa. Dysfunctional organizations are more dysfunctional online as well, because all of this change happened quickly.
Right.
we had no way of managing this change. It was unanticipated. And so it created stress in our organizations. And there's like stress it's like alcohol, right? It takes away your inhibitions, it uncovers who you really are type thing. And so when there's stress on an organization, they either rise to the occasion or they don't. And that shows where their culture was in the first place. Culture still exists in the remote setting. Remember, I mentioned culture is everything that has the power to influence our perceptions and behaviors. And those are all based upon patterns of behavior that we can see, that we can sense. And so what I want people to understand is this is actually the time to be focusing on developing your culture, because when it's remote, it's important to maintain connectivity. That's the biggest challenge, is remaining connected and being able to foster this sense of belonging with one another and working toward the same outcomes. And culture has a huge part in establishing, maintaining, supporting that.
Sure.
And so
it's the social fabric. Yeah.
It's changing, right? It's like that organizational entropy, right? Whatever isn't maintained deteriorates.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're not dealing with culture, because you said we can't do it right now, we're all remote, that's a mistake, because what's going on right now is culture is always there. It's always evolving. And so to be able to delay it is a privilege. But what I'm saying is there might come a day that you won't have a choice. We've seen, we're in the fall now, we came through a summer full of exposures of toxic work environments. Where do you think that's coming from? Mm-hmm. Why is it that it's amazing that there's this transparency that's coming out? It's a form of accountability, really, to help companies understand that you can't push this away forever. It's going to come get you, and then you're not going to have a choice in how to deal with it all the time. And so being a little bit more strategic up front, intentional, and understanding the importance, like this whole conversation has been about, understanding the importance of culture to your organization. And I'm speaking in business terms, but at the end of the day, it's also about people, right? It should always be about people, because you can't get anything done without them. You can't lead without people, and you can't get work done without people. So it's at the end of the day, making sure that the importance of that as a valuable asset in your organization is going to make the difference between success or failure, or it could give you the edge over your competitors, by the way. Or the other thing I've also talked about is go ahead, lose your talent,
Right.
What they're going to do, they're going to go out and create a competing business. And so you decide. All of this is about decisions and choices people make. And these things that hit the news over the summer, they didn't happen overnight. They had lots of chances. This is over a period of a long time where these patterns started to be established. These hostile work environments came to a head, and people had enough.
Yes. So that was awesome. Let me just ask you for one closing remark. If you're talking to decision makers in the startup space looking to create a stronger culture beyond reading your book, what's the key thing they should do?
First thing is foster your sense of curiosity. Ask the questions, right? And then seek those answers, because again, it can make the difference. And you might not know it or sense it now, but it will, I promise. I actually developed this is one of those things that got interrupted by the pandemic, but I was in the middle of delivering a series of learning experiences specifically for startup founders, because I strongly believe that they don't get the leadership development opportunities that people in companies sometimes get. And so I was creating this series. I was in the middle of delivering the series of learning experiences that helps startup leaders. I think I forget the title exactly. I said 3 reasons founders get fired and how to develop unhackable leadership. That was the first one.
Yeah.
And the second one was around teams, right? Third is about how to scale without losing your soul. And the fourth is around designing employee experiences, right? So I'm looking for a new platform to be able to share this great work, because it makes such a difference for founders to even just have the awareness and the knowledge about this. The way I define learning is changed behavior. So if they encounter new knowledge and it changes their behavior, then I've done my job.
Yep. Yep.
And I'm somebody that knows how to do this, has spent many years doing it. But my cause is not doing it for you. My cause is to build your capability to do it for yourselves.
Thank you. So I'll just close on that and say, if you're a founder and you're not intentional about your culture, I challenge you on that decision. Yeah.
Investors, I mean, you know, it's your role to shepherd these new companies to success. And you give them so many other resources and support. Why not provide this to them as well?
Fantastic. Karen, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.